Hello there, I'm Tim Vaughan. I'm Populo's editorial director, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar with the wonderful Jo Coxhill. Those of you already familiar with Populo will know that our customer base it's an A-list roll call of the biggest and most successful companies in the world, most of them with tens of thousands of employees and many with several hundred thousand people. But whether it's 50,000 or 500,000, we see two themes come up all the time when we talk to our clients: leadership communications and employee well-being. In fact, they're the top two topics, or two top topics, communicated by our customers wherever they are in the world. And I suppose that's not surprising, really, because both have an enormous impact on how people feel at work and how they show up every day. As Oxford University professor Jan Deneuve highlighted at our Engage conference last year, and if you haven't, or if you didn't catch it at the time, I'd highly recommend that you check it out, the recording on our website, which we'll share here. The results of Jan's global study into employee happiness and well-being were stark and categoric. Well-being is not only a huge driver of employee happiness, but it also has very real and measurable business impacts on productivity, on the ability of companies to retain and attract talent, and ultimately the bottom line, financial performance. And that's why we wanted to run this session today. It's about helping leaders communicate in ways that actually support their people, creating trust, belonging, and a culture where employees feel heard and valued. That's a culture where both the individuals and the company flourishes. So before I hand over to Jo, just a reminder that after her presentation, she's going to answer any questions that you have. So be sure to get them into us here over the next 30 minutes or so. So just pop them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Now, that's enough from me. Over to you, Jo.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. I'm so delighted to be here and working in partnership with Populo and having the opportunity to discuss a topic that I feel so incredibly passionate about. And I promise that by the end of this session, you'll leave with some new insights, some tips and tools to help you work with your leaders to truly improve well-being within your organisation through effective communications and behaviours. So before I get going, just wanted to spend a few minutes to introduce myself. And whilst I do that, why don't you also pop into the chat a few bits of information about yourself? So maybe you could add your name, where you're from, and how long you've been in internal comms or HR. And whilst you're doing that, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Jo. I run a business called Vision 29, and I'm on a mission to make work not suck. I consult into organisations of all shapes and sizes and in all industries to help those companies to improve their performance and their profits by creating happy, healthy and engaged teams through the power of employee voice. To me, it's so important to work in partnership with CEOs, HR, internal comms and EX teams to help them put the employees at the heart of their organisation and create cultures where both the individuals and the companies thrive. Because I feel that it's so important that we need to create resilient workplaces, we need to work smarter, not harder, and we need to create that sense of belonging for all employees so that everybody can do well and perform well. Yeah, keep putting your comments in the chats. It's really important to know who's on the session. I can see we've got Jose and Kelly. Oh, hi, Kelly. I know Kelly, so thank you for joining. And Pauline, I know Pauline too. Great to see you guys, and thank you so much for joining. I'm going to move on, but keep putting your messages in the chat. It's really good to see who's joining us and where you're from. What I also want to do is just spend a few minutes talking to you about why I feel so passionate about workplace wellbeing and why it's really important to me. Like many of us, I guess, I've had quite a squiggly career. I started my career right back in the late 90s. I fell into a role in marketing and I actually fell into a role in a company that was absolutely amazing. I couldn't have asked for a better company. It had the best culture at a time when we didn't really talk about culture, to be honest. I grew my role there. I went from a marketing specialist to the global head of marketing. I grew a team. I worked with amazing people on a global basis. I traveled the world. It was absolutely amazing. I had a super sense of belonging, and I was really, really happy there. And I worked there for a very, very long time. But all good things must come to an end. And after about 14 years, I was made redundant. And then I went into the real world of work, where I started realizing that there was toxic workplaces, micromanaging bosses, office politics, unrealistic workloads, lack of prioritization and poor prioritization. And I also then had to start juggling all of that with my own personal prioritization and getting that work-life balance that we all kind of strive for. And on a personal note, as we all do, I dealt with a lot of things, from depression, bouts of depression, postnatal depression, many, many miscarriages. And then when I did have my family, managing that whole kind of family life and being part of the sandwich generation, where I was dealing with elderly parents as well. And then latterly, dealing with workplace stress and being signed off work for a period of time with burnout. And all of that resulted in me kind of going from different places of work and finally setting up my business, not once but twice, so that I had a lot more control and autonomy over my own well-being and how I showed up for work. And one thing that I recognized all the way through my journey, and consistently kind of took note of, was when my leaders did or didn't show up for me when I was going through my high times and my bad times, and how consistently I performed when I had good leaders with good communications and a good attitude to well-being versus when I didn't. And it's really made me think about the whole place of work and how important it is that as leaders and as companies, we support our employees through the good times and the bad times. And that's why I'm on such a mission to make work not suck. I see all loads and loads of hellos are still coming in, lots of introductions. So it's really good to see you all coming in, and so many names I recognise as well, which is great. Um, But to kick things off, what I want to do is I want to run a quick poll. I ran this poll myself on LinkedIn, and I'm really, really interested to see whether the results of the poll line up with the results that I got on LinkedIn. So if you wouldn't mind, take a few moments and see if you can respond to this. The question is, how well do your leaders support employee well-being through their everyday behaviour and communication? So think about it and think, in your workplace, do they do it really well? Do they walk the walk? They try, but it's a bit hit and miss. Not well, there's a big say-do gap, or you're not sure, as it rarely comes up. If you can vote on one of those, that would be great. And I'm really interested to see how the results come in. Oh, okay, cool, good. Right, okay. So when I did this on LinkedIn, not well, big say do gap was the highest. That came in at about 57%. So it's interesting to see that with you guys, it's not quite that bad. We are trying, but we are a bit hit and miss. So it's quite safe to say that either way, not many of us are doing it really, really well. And we're kind of in that bit of it's hit and miss, or there's a big say do gap. So that's great. Thank you so much. It just helps me to kind of paint a picture of who I've got in my virtual room with me today. So that's great. Okay, so when I was putting this session together, I asked Populo, and Tim just touched on it here. I asked them to share with me any data that they had about the amount of wellbeing messages that were being sent out on their platform. And they came back with two pieces of information. One was that they send 65.8 million wellness messages on their platform in the last 12 months. Let me say that again, 65.8 million wellness messages have gone out on their platform. And as Tim said, wellness is the second most communicated theme or topic behind leadership communications. So that number to me is absolutely huge. When I break it down, that works out as 5.7 million messages a month, 1.3 million messages a week, and 188,000 messages per day. That's huge. And yet, what we're still seeing in the workplace is poor well-being, high work-related stress, and burnout continues to rise. And this is backed up by some data that I picked up from Mental Health UK in a report that they released last year. Hi, Lise. And this data was in a report that they sent out last year. And what they shared was that 91% of adults in the UK experienced high or extreme levels of stress in the past year. And of those, 20%, so that's 1 in 5, have needed to take time off work due to stress. And 35% don't feel comfortable talking to their managers or their senior leaders about experiencing high levels or extreme levels of work-related stress. So what we're seeing is this huge amount of wellbeing comms that we're sending out. But what we're also seeing is high levels of stress and burnout and poor well-being in the workplace. So what's going on? Well, for me, it's really simple. And from the research I've done and from my own experiences, the problem is that we're treating the symptoms of poor well-being and not the causes. And if you think about it as an iceberg, basically we are at the very tip of that iceberg. And what we're doing is that we're talking about and we're communicating all those 188,000 messages that we're sending out are communicating about everything that's above that line. So we're talking about wellbeing initiatives, we're talking about gym memberships and yoga, and we're pointing people to a wealth of information that people can tap into about their wellbeing, about how to sleep better, how to eat better, how to manage your stress and your burnout. And we're pointing people to mental health first aiders and our EAP to help them manage their stress and the symptoms in their poor well-being once it's taken hold. But what we should be doing is we should be looking at what's below the line. We should be looking at our organisational cultures and our values, our behaviours, our norms and our attitudes, because it's these behaviours, it's these areas that are really causing the stress in the first place. And this isn't where we're focusing our time. This isn't where we're focusing our attention, and it's not where we're focusing our communications. And so what we're doing is we're talking about the symptoms and we're dealing with those rather than addressing the root causes. And the only way we're going to really start addressing those root causes is if we begin to work in partnership with our leaders and get them to understand that these are the root causes. And what we do know is that because we're sending so many comms, there is that appetite with our leaders to be able to change and address the well-being. We're just doing it not quite in the right way. So we've got to help our leaders get out of the mindset that well-being is something that we do, or something that we offer, or something that we do as an afterthought, and that we need to change that behaviour or change it so that we understand that well-being lives in how we lead every single day. And instead of asking ourselves what wellbeing initiatives should we launch, we should be saying what behaviours, what habits, what norms and what rituals are getting in the way of helping people to thrive in our everyday. So what I want to know is this resonating with you guys? Is this making sense? Is this how you're feeling in your businesses? So pop your thoughts, do a hey yes, or a hands up or whatever, to let me know that it is resonating with you. And a quick reminder as well, make sure that if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat now so that we can make sure that I get to them in the Q&A a bit later on. And I can see loads and loads of thumbs up, so that's really good. Thanks guys, because I can't see any of your faces. That's really good. Thank you. And what I truly believe is that the most successful businesses and the most effective leaders are the ones that are brave enough to look inside their organisations and to take action on their cultures, their values and their behaviours, and to change that so that we can truly eradicate poor wellbeing in the workplace for good. So just to summarise then, what our communications are saying is one thing and what our behaviours are doing is another. And that's where we've got this gap. And this is further supported by some research that has recently been shared by the Institute of Internal Communications. Just last month, they shared their IC index, and what they said was that there's this huge gap, like almost 50% difference between what leaders believe the challenges are for their employees and what the employees are actually feeling in the workplace. And this is further supported by what Tim said, by some research by the University of Oxford, which reported that leaders believed that the drivers for well-being in the workplace was remuneration primarily, and then when the researchers asked the employees what actually is the drivers for the employees is that sense of belonging and that feeling of trust and being trusted. And the research was really interesting, actually. So Janice is going to pop a link to that research. It was a piece of research that it's already there. It's a piece of research that Populo did with the University of Oxford. It's a really good read. So if you want to click on the link and download that and read that in your own time, then you're more than welcome to. And so what we can see is that this gap is getting bigger. And what we need to look at is how we can close the say-do gap. So before I go into that, though, I'd like to tell you a little story. During COVID, as we all know, there was such a drive for our leaders to encourage people to look after their well-being. All of our comms, if you can probably remember, were about encouraging people to take regular breaks, to take their lunches, to make sure they logged off on time, and really just made sure that they got out for their daily walks and just looked after themselves. I know that I sent those comms out and I wholeheartedly backed them and supported them. And after a little while, I noticed that some of our leaders in the business I was in, they weren't quite doing what we were saying. And there were some of them that weren't logging off or were logging back on at late, but regularly logging on. And inadvertently, what we were doing without realizing it is we were creating our own say-do gap. And I bet many of you can recall instances, either in the past or even now, where that say-do gap is happening in your organisations. And when this happens, and when it goes undetected for too long, that's when we can do some real damage. Because over a long period of time, if the employees start seeing that say-do gap, then it starts to erode the trust that they have with their leaders, especially if they see the leaders saying one thing and doing another. And what that does is it contributes to the beginning of stress for employees and them to start to disengage from work and from their leaders. Over time, we see a rise in absence rates and we start to see higher staff turnover rates because people are becoming disengaged in what we're saying and what we're doing. And most disappointingly or most dangerously over time, what happens is people stop listening altogether. So our role in comms and in HR is to help our leaders to make sure that that say-do gap doesn't get too big and that we don't address it too late. And so how can we do that? So I've got 3 tips or 3 things that I would suggest that you do to start looking at how you can close the say-do gap. And the first thing, probably not surprise, is we need to gather some data. So we need to audit that gap. And we need to know how big it is so that then we can start taking the right action. And the ways to do that is you can probably do this with all of the data that you've already got in your fingertips somewhere in your organisation. So if you look at your survey data, your engagement surveys, for example, or any other surveys that you run, your pulse checks, you can look at your absence rates and you can look at your exit interviews. And exit interviews are pure gold and usually untapped. So if you don't look at those, but you can get access to them, then they'll give you a lot of information that you can use to start building the picture for this gap audit. And also you can look outside your business as well. So if you haven't, it's always quite fun to have a look at how you're being rated on Glassdoor. And there's often a lot of insights in there which will help you to kind of create that picture as well. What I'd also suggest is that you run some listening audits or some listening sessions with your employees, and you could just ask 3 simple questions. What are we saying? What are we doing? And how big do you feel that gap is? And straight away, you'll get some really honest and open responses from your employees that you can start plugging into this audit. And finally, you can do your own review. So if you're in internal comms or if you're in HR, you can work with your comms team and you can compare what you're saying versus what the reality is. And you can do that from any angle. You can do it from a well-being angle, you can do it from a flexibility angle, from an inclusion, or that sense of belonging angle. And those 3 pieces of information, you can put them together, and from that you can create your say-do gap map. And then this is your data, this is your information, and you can use that to start the conversation with your leaders, and you can feed that back to them about really what's happening within your business. And I'd recommend you do that by showing some of the feedback, some of your key themes that you've picked up, and also some of the feedback, some of the verbatim feedback, obviously anonymized, so that your leaders can really start to get a sense for the size, or the reality of this gap that there may be in your business. I would also obviously recommend that you don't just create the problems, or you don't just share the problems, but you also share some ideas and solutions about how you think we as a business can go about addressing those. Um, I've also just, again, in partnership with Populo, so I've got a lovely partnership with Populo going at the moment. I'm so pleased with it. And today we've launched another blog that I've written all about how to speak your leaders' languages. So if you go into the boardroom, or if you're doing a presentation to your leaders, you need to make sure that you're speaking their language, and that your message and that your proposal is really going to land. So I think Janice is going to, there it is. Janice has popped the link to that blog in the chat. So have a look at that later. But in essence, basically what I'm talking about there is, if you want this audit and the results and the recommendations from your audit to land, then you need to think about the leaders that you're communicating with. You need to think about their communication style, and you need to make sure that you're communicating in their style. So, for example, if your leaders are very data driven, then make sure that you get to the point, you share the data. And you share the data, and that you get to the point and you get to your solutions quickly. But also what you need to think about is, what are the challenges that your leaders are facing right now? If they are looking at cost cutting and operational efficiencies, then make sure that your report talks to their priorities. So you could think about, if they're looking at cost cutting, and if your data does show that you've got high absence rates and a lot of people off long-term sick, which is costing your business a certain amount of money, or if you've got high turnover of staff, then you could change to present your report to show that you're losing a lot of money in that respect, and that if you actually address the say-do cap, then you'll be able to make those efficiencies and savings by retaining your staff rather than losing them and having to go to the cost of recruiting for their roles. So think about that. The blog is got loads more information on that in, but I just wanted to touch on that and tie it in, especially because the blog launched today, which was great timing. And so I think also it's really important, because if you share the findings and the data with your leaders, it becomes a lot harder for them to refute that information and to push back on it. So the data is your secret sauce. And then once they buy into it, you can work with your leaders to help them to communicate in a much more consistent way. And I'd say there's kind of three main areas that you should focus on within that pillar. One is to get them to acknowledge the gap themselves. So we've done the research, we've done the audit. We need to communicate back and acknowledge that we do know that there is a gap there, and encourage them to say things that we said that we would prioritise well-being, and this is what we're going to do about it. So we're constantly joining up those dots and having that golden thread and letting people know what we're doing and that we are taking action. And then help your leaders to get into the habit of circling back, and taking some accountability for it themselves. So, they could say things that, we've heard you say this, and we're going to take action by doing this. And again, it's just that constant feedback loop that we need to do. And finally, what we need to do is encourage our leaders to role model the right behaviours. And it can be through the little things. It doesn't have to be whole-scale change to start with. It can be really simple things like asking people how they are at the beginning of a meeting, rather than lurching straight into the actual crux of the meeting. Sometimes just taking that little bit of time to check in with each other rather than checking up. It just helps people feel better, feel more relaxed, feel more cared for, feel more valued in the workplace. And then obviously saying thank you when people have done a good job, and showing recognition as well. So these micro messages, these small things, they all soon start add up to improve the employee experience and help them to feel seen, valued and heard. And so I think the key message of all of this is that we must be the change that we want to see, and that all starts from the top. And so, how can we do that? How can we close that say-do gap? How can we help our leaders to communicate with more empathy, with intention, and begin to change our cultures? It's a lot, isn't it? Really, if you think about it. To me, what we need to do is we need to start nudging. We can't do all of the change at the same time. So, with tiny little nudges, with nudging our leaders, with nudging our comms and nudging our cultures, over time, we will start to see that change. And I think now's a really good time to point out that when we talk, when we think about comms, we often think about internal comms. So we think about the all staff emails, we think about the town halls, we think about the broadcasts. But what want us to start thinking about is all of the ways that we communicate, especially as leaders. So it's more about, those water cooler moments, those day-to-day interactions, the times that we're in meetings, and so on. So, yeah, just think about that. Don't think about just general internal comms. It's everything. It's every single way that we communicate as leaders in our daily interactions. And so, how can we help leaders to do that too? Obviously, I'm going to say we start with listening. Listening is the crux of my offering, and it is there because I am so committed to making sure that our employees have a voice. And I believe there's so much value in giving our employees a voice. So there's so many ways that we can encourage our leaders to listen more. And some of them we've already got at our fingertips as well. It's no longer about broadcast, town halls, and sharing information through one directional communications. It's about two-way communication. It's about active and always on listening and embedding that into everything that we do all of the time. So we can set up structured listening sessions, particularly around wellbeing. We could have employee panels, we can have feedback loops, we could have anonymous Q&As if we feel that really people aren't that open to being so open straight away. And then we can follow that on with small pulse sessions or like check-in sessions so that we can keep the conversation going all of the time. We can encourage our leaders to hold Ask Me Anythings or open door sessions. So again, people get used to giving that feedback to their leaders all of the time and they feel comfortable doing that. And we can encourage leaders to have skip level meetings as well. Obviously, from all of the listening, we have to show that we are listening and that we're taking action. So there has to be that feedback loop and we have to start driving some real change from it. An example that I would like to share with you is when I worked inside a business, we used to do regular Ask Me Anything sessions with our CEO. They were really effective, but what I loved about that CEO especially is that he would have one phrase and he would always use it. And when he was asked a question, he would say, "That's a great question." And I loved it because what he was doing is he was validating that question to the person that was brave enough to ask it. And he was making them feel valued, validated and heard. So just by saying that simple phrase, "That's a great question," you're really making people feel that, that it's okay to ask questions and that they're validated. In today's day and age, I think it's really important for us to communicate much more authentically. So getting rid of the business speech and the corporate speak and adopting a much more conversational tone is really, really important. So even if it's in the broadcast or in the much more intimate sessions, it's just important that we're much more authentic in ourselves in the way we communicate now. And that can come through in lots of different ways. And I think for leaders, it's really important for them to acknowledge that they don't have to have all of the answers all of the time. And it's absolutely okay to acknowledge that we're facing challenges as a business. And that they don't have all of the answers. And often what that can do is it can build trust as well. And it shows that people can offer up ideas and suggestions for how collectively we can come up with solutions to problems that we're facing as well. And also, I think, especially in a day or an age where we've got AI and a lot of our comms can be run through AI and they can be very, very polished, it's really important for our leaders to show vulnerability and to tell their own stories of where they may have struggled with their own well-being or with other issues, so that they come across as just being human, just like all of us, and much more relatable. I've got a few examples, and I'm a bit conscious of time, so I'm just going to give one. There was a leader that I worked with when we were going through a tough time. We were having regular updates on a particular topic, and he invited all of the questions to be asked of him. And even when he couldn't answer them, he took it away and he made it a personal commitment to come back to the group the following week with an answer for it. And it's that kind of activity, that commitment from the leader, that builds the trust. And he really did a good job of making it so that people knew that their questions were valid and that he would come back and answer them. So number three, so we live in a fast-paced world. We deliver all of the time. And the expectation is to deliver a lot. But sometimes what we need to do as leaders is we need to slow that right down and we need to take some time to check in on our people and to really take the time to get to know them and to make them feel a bit more valued. And again, it's really easy to do in meetings rather than just hurtling into the meeting and starting the meeting. Just take a few minutes to check in, ask how people are, and remember some of that information. Wouldn't it just be great as a leader if you could remember something that somebody said to you, and then the next time you bumped into them in the corridor, you could just stop them and say, oh, by the way, how did your son get on in his sports day or his competition? Or, how's your mum doing now? It's that sort of stuff that really makes people feel valued and important. And obviously, we talk about this a lot, I think, but saying thank you and giving recognition when it's due, it really helps people to feel that the work that they're doing is valued and that they're important. And another example, and I'm going to, this is the last example I'll give, but I'm going to give it because I think it's so important. I'm working with a client now. They're out in the field a lot. They come together once a week and they make it really, really an important part of their coming together for them to talk about personal things that are going on in their lives, to celebrate individual and collective wins, and to take time to check in and see how people are doing. And just that as a day or weekly ritual is really important because they don't see each other all the time. And when they come together, it's a great opportunity for them to connect on so many different levels. And it just becomes a ritual and it's just really transforming how they're communicating and connecting as a group. So moving on. I feel like I'm talking a lot on this slide, so apologies, guys, but there's lots to get across to you. And again, we've had a lot of crises over the last few years, and it almost feels that crisis is coming like, the order of the day. There's always something for us to kind of run up against and lean into. So as leaders, it's really important for us to model calm amongst the chaos. Because if as leaders what we're acting like is frantic, reactive, or we just go missing in action, then people often see that, they feel it, and they start to model it too. So when things are frantic, as they often are, if the leaders can just model that calm behaviour, if they can go into meetings fully prepared, and if we can help them to do that, if they can stay calm, then that will create that kind of environment and culture for the rest of the people as well. And finally, being consistent is really important. So what we've seen is we're communicating loads and loads of communications about well-being and it's not landing. So what we could easily do is roll back a lot of those communications and streamline it, but be consistent. So people know that they're going to get regular updates. They know that we're going to focus on certain things at certain times, and we can build a rhythm in those communications rather than just bombarding and almost oversubscribing or kind of overpowering people with all of those comms. I think it's really important that we use simple and plain language so that everybody can relate to it and we can just think about everybody in our business, especially if we're employing or working with multicultural or individuals or people across different cultures. And it's also important to make sure that that message is consistent. So the messages from leaders, from internal comms and HR are all joined up and we're consistently communicating the same thing. So before I go on to the next slide, and just so I can have a sip of water, we're going to run a poll. This is a Populo poll. It should pop up and it's popped up on your screen now. It won't be there for very long, and it's just a question about how you can use your comms to boost. Oh, would you like learn how great leadership comms can boost well-being and drive performance? Okay. Okay, so just try and move on. There we go. So We're almost at the end, but I've shared loads and loads of information with you, and I really do hope that it's resonated. Some of it, maybe all of it. And I would really like you to go away and do something, at least one thing, straight away in your business. So I'd really like us to make a commitment, or you to make a commitment anyway. What I'd like you to do is just think about, was there one thing or something that I said that you think you could go and put into place in your business straight away? It could be anything really, but just one thing. What I'd like you to do is write it down on a piece of paper in front of you, whether you've got your notebook or a post-it note. And I'd like you to write, this week, I'll stop, start, or nudge something. I'll measure it by somehow, and my accountability buddy is. So, as an example, I've got one for you here. This week, I'll nudge my leaders to open their next team meeting with a genuine check in, not just a status update. I'll measure it by noticing whether anyone shares something personal or emotional during the check in, and asking the leaders afterwards how it felt for them and whether they would do it again. And I'll also measure it by listening out for whether the meeting felt more connected or relaxed than usual. And my accountability buddy is, now that could be anyone, right? It could be somebody else on this webinar, or it could be somebody in your team. Or if you haven't got anybody, then I'm willing to be that accountability buddy for you. So if you write or send this to me in an email or in a direct message to me on LinkedIn, what I'll do is next Friday, I'll check in with you and see how you're getting on with that. As I said, it's really important that we start nudging the behaviours, and it all starts with us and coming out of this session with one thing that we think that we can start, stop, or nudge to do. So hopefully you've written down something that you feel that you can do, and always just check in with me afterwards if you want me to be your accountability buddy for that. So what we've said, what I've said is that we're not going to fix everything today, but we started to think differently, and that's where the magic is going to start happening. Small shifts done consistently make a huge difference, and you're starting by doing it yourself. Yeah, you're starting to do it yourself, and I really want you to keep doing that as well. But just as a bit of fun, maybe a bit of fun, or a final thought, I would really like you to think about one of those fluffy wellbeing comms that you've probably seen in the past, or like me, you've probably been guilty of writing at some point. Something like, your wellbeing matters, blah, blah, blah. And that has come from a leader who is consistently online at 11 o'clock at night. And I want you to take a moment to think, if you could rewrite that comm, what would you wish that it would say, or what would you rewrite it to be? Think about something that could be honest and grounded in real care and not corporate speak. I mean, it could be something simple like, it's 4 o'clock, shut your laptop, you've done enough today. Or it could be, I'm logging off now and I hope you're going to do the same. It doesn't need to be overthought. It could be one simple sentence, but I just want you to think about that and jot it down. Because what I want us to do is I want us to start thinking about how we can make our comms more authentic and how we can help our leaders to start being more authentic in how they're communicating. And if you're up for it, I'd like you to take a picture of it, and either take it as a picture on your post-it note or your notebook, or if you want to, take a selfie, and I'd like you to share it on LinkedIn. And the reason I want you to do that is because whilst I've shared this with you guys in this session, and whilst this session will be accessible afterwards, I feel like we need to do more to get the message out there about how we can communicate much more authentically to improve wellbeing in organisations. And I think if we come together, if we share what good comms look like on LinkedIn, then we'll get the message out further. If you tag me and Populo in it, then I can see it and I can endorse it on LinkedIn. And also, if you do tag me and Populo, then I'll send to you a free workbook that summarises all of the practical steps that I've written in this webinar, plus some bonus ones as well. So you'll get that afterwards too. This is our chance to rewrite the script. and gently start nudging our leaders and others to show them what good wellbeing comms could look like. And I've done on the screen, I've done a sample post that you could write. You don't have to write it, you could do your own. It's entirely up to you. You could take a quick snap of it if you wanted to. But it's just something so that we can keep the conversation going beyond this webinar, because that's how passionately I feel about this. It's something that we together have got to collectively start to come together and start to change. So, just before we sign off, I want to say a huge thank you for listening to me for the last half hour or so. You can scan the QR code or you can find me on LinkedIn. Please do connect. Please do follow me. I post most days about internal comms, employee experience, and how to make work not suck. And I would love it if you joined me in that conversation. But we're not stopped. We're not finished either, because we're going to do a follow-up session on the 3rd of September. And this session is going to be a panel where I'm going to be hosting, and I'm going to be joined with a number of in-house internal comms and HR people who have succeeded in working with their leaders in transforming the well-being within their organisations. So you'll hear real world, real life examples of how people have successfully done this in their organisations. So if you'd like to join that session, the link to join up is in the chat. And I'm going to finish now, ready for some Q&A. Hopefully,
Hey,
some.
thanks, Jo. That was absolutely fantastic. So much to get our heads around, and your enthusiasm was, infectious there.
Oh,
Um, and it'd be great if people could spread the word and share this webinar with their networks. Just a quick one. Why do you think there's a gap between leaders who believe in well-being and their stats show that it, they recognize that it's a competitive advantage, and yet only a third of them actually do and prioritize it. Why do you think that would be?
yeah, if you cast your mind back to the iceberg, that's where I think it is. They've got the drive, they want to change or address the well-being issues in their business, but they're just focusing on the wrong areas. They're focusing on the stuff above the line. And Janice, could you stop sharing? I can't stop sharing my screen at the moment, so it might just help if you want to stop sharing my screen. Yeah, they're focusing above the line, so they're just focusing on the symptoms and not the causes. And often it's a lot harder to focus on the causes. It's a lot harder to change your organisational cultures, your norms, your behaviours, and so on. But that is where we're going to see the real change and the real impact. And that's where really they should be focusing. And I would probably guess that they're not.
And you spoke about AI. With the rise of AI generated content in internal comms, how can leaders ensure that their messages still feel authentic and empathetic and human? That trust factor.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think they need to start showing up in person a lot more. I think, we can definitely use AI. We should be using AI to help us to formulate those messages, but we need to start showing up in person. We need to start doing a lot more, kind of face to face or in person, even if it's one to many or one to few communications. And I think the other thing, and I touched on this again in the webinar, didn't I, is about bringing in your own authenticity and telling your own stories, and bringing in that human factor so that people know that, kind of these are real people's lived experiences rather than just something that you've generated in AI.
Great. Unfortunately, we're up against the clock.
Ah,
But we look forward to picking up this again at our September webinar,
yeah,
which, as you said, we're going to have real world practitioners talking about their experiences and how they're making leadership comms work for employee belonging. So thank you. And thank you
brilliant.
everybody for attending.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye bye.